Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for sharing your insights today. Since 2017, when that bill was signed into law, there's been a big debate about the impacts of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the idea, my colleagues on the other side have argued that it was only meant to benefit the wealthy and corporations, which I think is a kind of one of the age-old Democrat talking points, and I don't think it could be more inaccurate. This reform of the nation's outdated tax code, in fact, reduced rates for every income bracket, nearly doubled the standard deduction, doubled the child tax credit, as we all know, for working families, and made American businesses more competitive. And as a result, the economy took off, household incomes increased, the unemployment rate hit its lowest level in 50 years, and businesses returned their operations to the United States, and the list goes on. But what I would argue is that all those gains are going to be lost if Congress doesn't extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act before the end of next year. And so let me, Mr. Bunn, begin with you, and I'm sure some of this has been covered already, but on Tuesday evening, Vice President Harris insinuated that extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is nothing more than a tax cut for those at the top, which, as I said, is a familiar talking point. However, as every member of this committee knows, if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were to expire at the end of 2025, it would result in a $4 trillion tax hike on Americans in every income bracket, middle-class families and Main Street businesses. Could you outline for this committee what an expiration of TCJA would mean for families across this country and for our nation's economy? And like I said, I know you've probably touched on this already. You did some in your opening remarks, but could you elaborate perhaps and just speak to that issue?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cut taxes across the board, and its expiration means that will be widespread tax increases. We have a calculator on our website that allows folks to look at how this might look for different family types or income levels. I ran some numbers in preparation for this hearing. A single parent earning $52,000 with 2 kids will see a nearly $1,500 tax increase. A married couple earning $85,000 with 2 kids will see roughly $1,600 tax increase. And these are real impacts that will be felt. You know, that's on the scale of, you know, an extra rent payment or extra mortgage payment, depending on where you live and housing costs in your area of the country. But it's significant.
So could you, one of the other, arguments obviously been made is how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act distributed among income groups. And if you look at just revenue as a percentage of GDP over the past 50 years, it's averaged 17.3%. If you look at where it is today or what is projected to be in 2024, revenue as a percentage of GDP is projected to be 17.2%. So roughly in the range. And if you, in fact, if you go back to a more narrow time frame between 96 and 2015, it was 17.2%. And then you look at spending and where outlays have gone over the same 50-year period, the average up until 2023, 74 to 23, was 21%. By comparison, CBO projects outlays in 2024 as a percentage of GDP to be at 24.2%. So similar amounts in terms of overall size of the economy, revenue raised by the tax code, but spending up significantly, over 3% relative to the 50-year average. So you can see it's not a question. We run deficits and debt. You look at this problem we have, you put it in perspective. It really is the fact that we're spending a lot more. And it's not a tax issue, it's a spending issue. But what I'd like to have you speak to, if you could, in the remaining time that I have, is this question about how the tax burden distributes across different income categories. The share of income taxes paid by the top 1% in 2001 was 33.2%. In 2021, it was 45.8%. And more specifically, I would like to have you, if you could, talk about just how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because one of the things that I looked at when we were going through this discussion at the time was how does once this is done, the argument was made by the other side is it's going to shift the burden and lower income taxpayers are going to pay more, higher income taxpayers are going to get a big tax cut. I'm curious what the actual experience was in terms of how the tax burden was distributed across income categories. Obviously, if you go back to 2001, you had, as I said, the top 1% paying 33.2%. In 2021, they were paying 45.8%. So, and that was some of the impact, I think, of JC, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But could you speak to that issue? Because I think that's a relevant one as we think about the future and some of the proposals that have been made by my colleagues on the other side to raise taxes even higher on people in upper income categories.
Thank you for the question. So because of the pre-existing situation where we had a progressive tax code and we were cutting taxes across the board, certainly there were benefits across the board. But as we've seen, as the data you pointed to has shown, the tax burden has become more distributed, more burdensome for the higher income earners since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And this is not just kind of a snapshot kind of thing. This is a continuing kind of trend that we're noticing. And now some of that is due to, in some periods, really high levels of realization of capital gains for high income earners. But this trend is continuing where more of our tax code is leaning in to high income earners. And I'd like to cite, if I may, some work by Brian Riedel at the Manhattan Institute that looks at, if some of the proposals that have been mentioned today have been were really leaned into as far as deficit reduction for higher taxes on companies or higher taxes on high earners, you're still left with probably 2/3 of that annual deficit that's not covered with even leaning into taxes on the wealthy or corporations. So this concept of the gap between our revenues and our spending needs to be much more than about just focusing on the wealthy, and it needs to be focused on some of our long-term liabilities
And my time's expired. Just the short answer to the question is the tax code has become more progressive, not less.
Correct.
Thank you.